Thank you very much for having me here. I have about 800 slides to give. I'm going to try to do it in half an hour. So maybe I won't share them all. It's always a little bit awkward to come after David because we talk about a lot of the same things, and he's better than I am. So I'm going to try to take a little different tack on some of the material, some of the general ideas, area that he's working on, related to water, modeling household water and energy use. And I'm going to put up here, since I'm stealing so shamelessly from a PhD student that I had with Manuel, who's not here, I'll put him in here and let you know that he's the one responsible for all the good parts of this talk. We also have, if you're interested in California stuff, we have a water blog on California that's kind of fun. So this is on water and energy, and in the United States, I don't know if it's the same in Europe, people have trouble saying water energy without saying the word nexus. So I put that in there too, sort of as a joke. But the idea is that water is very nice, I think, as a subject of study because it connects so many things. You can study sociology, political science, economics, technology, chemistry, anything through water. And so I've always enjoyed it. So sort of an outline of what I want to talk about, some just overall perspectives on water energy analysis, purposes of the analysis. I want to spend a little bit of time on approaches to analysis because I think this is really the heart of the matter because there are some very different, almost philosophically different, epistemologically different approaches. And then I'll spend some time on Alvar's work, but probably not show all of it, and then have a little bit of time at the end for concentrating on what are some of the hard parts of what we're trying to do, some opportunities for the future, and a few conclusions. So some sort of perspectives on water energy analysis. Like I said before, water really connects all of us with each other in the world, in different aspects of the world, both water supply, energy, economics, all those other things. From a management perspective, though, we've really got several different perspectives. We've got households which are interested in being happy and wealthy and safe and have a comfortable life. We've got water and energy utilities, which usually are separate organizations, which have their own economic and social objectives and technical objectives, engineering objectives, quality objectives, service quality objectives. All of these exist within a society, which usually exists at a local scale, a regional scale, a national scale, with regulators of the utilities and public health officials, national economic regulators, things like that. And then all of this occurs, I think, now in a global perspective, not only from the perspective of the global economy, of energy prices, and things like that, labor movements, but also a global perspective in terms of climate warming and greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see a lot of different, sometimes confusion in analysis by people when people mix these objectives or focus on one and not very much on the other. So each perspective really has different interests in the subject of water and energy use, particularly even at the household level. So households, when they're looking at analysis of water and energy at the household level, they're interested in happiness, right? Just think of what it's like when you go home. But you don't want it to cost too much. You want to have cheap happiness. Right? You might have some larger social consciousness that wants to reduce resource use, energy and water use. And there'll be, if you're in California, there'll be times, a few years out of a decade, hopefully only that much, where your water utility is going to say, you have to use less. I don't care how much you're willing to pay. You have to use less. And then for us, the important thing is households don't pay us to do the analysis. Very rarely. They don't pay us directly. Water and energy utilities, they've got a different set of objectives. And they're all sort of multi-objective. But on a water and energy utility, certainly if they're private, they're interested in making money. Even if they're public utilities, they're interested in not losing money and making sure they have enough money to pay their engineers well. Right? You all know this, I think. They have some technical objectives for demand management, which are different a little bit than the households, and that they're trying to move peaks around, partly for service reliability purposes, partly to cost minimization, capital cost, and operating cost. So we're trying to move the peaks around. And then we're also trying to, in many cases, trying to reduce the resource use, both energy and water use, unless it's very tied to revenues. So we'll often have a phase of the development, historical development of the water and energy utilities where we have to regulate them in such a way that they can make money despite selling less energy, despite selling less water. And certainly in California, we're going through that kind of a phase right now in many of our water utilities. How can we set up the regulations and the pricing structures so they can make enough money while providing less service? I think as university professors, wouldn't it be nice if we could get paid more for having fewer students? It's odd, but we actually want that in California with water provision. It's actually socially desirable. Water utilities, energy utilities, they have to get through droughts. In California, 15% of our electricity production comes from hydropower, and we've lost basically half of that in the last couple of years of drought. We have other extreme events that utilities have to deal with: mechanical outages, of all sorts, spills of contaminants, things like that. Water energy utilities also have these changes in technology that they're seeing. The smart metering technology, the different kinds of sensors that can be deployed in a network, the different kinds of modeling technology. How can they make use of these opportunities? You're sitting here working at a utility for 20, 30 years. You get to the management level, and somebody comes along with a new technology that you're 20 or 30 years removed from, and you can sort of dimly understand that this technology, these smart meters, give you some potential for improving the way you do business, but you haven't thought about that before. You think about other things for 30 years, so this is quite an intellectual challenge to you, I think. And then a final point I think about the utilities, both energy and water, is that they pay for analysis, but usually not enough. Not as much as we would like them to. And they don't often usually want to do as broad of an analysis as we would like them to do. Right? So they often say, I can see the value of this little study, but those of us that are in the field can often say, well, yeah, but you should be looking at this. It would only cost you 10% more to do it, 20% more to do this. Why are you just looking at this? Society, well, they don't pay for analysis very much, and it's pretty rare. But they're also interested in economic well-being for the society, reducing resource use. They have some global responsibilities that deal with greenhouse gas emissions. They feel these droughts, both for environmental as well as water supply purposes, human water supply purposes, they're trying to get through. And then the society has some general interest in utility regulation from an economic and social perspective as well as from an environmental perspective. All of these are very different purposes and interests in this. Well, okay, so that's nice. Why are we doing these studies? Lots of different reasons. How do we do these studies? A couple of different approaches. The more normal approach to do this is empirical, where you sort of take a large data set, bigger the better, And you do regression, econometrics, machine learning, sort of a top-down view of all this data, and you try to infer from the data what's really going on. Or just even just to get a crude empirical relationship that'll get you through the day. There's some advantages to this. I just take the data, I throw it into a box. I have some expert on how to run these regressions, machine learning algorithms, of econometrics. You get paid more if you call it econometrics, but it's really a regression most of the time. And it immediately gives you some empirical relationship that has some R squared and some confidence intervals, and you can do this. And almost everybody with a technical undergraduate education has seen these things. So that manager, even though he's 30 years removed, he's probably seen regression at some point. This advantage of this kind of empirical approach is it relies on the data we have for calibrating and testing. And with the new smarter meters, and as we've seen in many of the talks so far this meeting, we have a lot more data now, much more than we ever would have dreamed of some years ago. We still have some disadvantages, even if we have a lot of data. That there's going to be changes in the future. And these empirical models are empirical. They don't have necessarily embedded in them a deeper understanding of how the world works. And so as you move into the future, away from the data set that you had necessarily in the past, you're not sure that that empirical relationship is going to work. I see this a lot with climate change. Okay, we've got these big, elaborate equations on how water use occurs, outdoor water use occurs with the past climate. Well, in climate change, well, maybe that's going to change that empirical relationship, but we don't have data from the future to do that kind of regression stuff. Maybe we'll have to go to some other place. Okay, now I'm going to do it for Florida instead of for New England, right? But the causality is not clear on how these things change. So we've got lots of examples of these. I was reminded, I think the first price elasticity of demand for water study was 1963 by a fellow named Gottlieb. And there have been probably 10,000 of these studies. Every water economist that got a master's degree and above has done some price elasticity of demand study. And so now the big studies are now meta studies of the local studies. And they're interesting. We use them. They say 0.3 plus or minus 5. But we learn a lot of useful things. But they have these limits of non-causality. The approach that David was talking about is much more mechanistic. So when David was looking at his simulation and optimization modeling, it was more mechanistic. We're going to look at each end use and basically build a model for each end use. And it's more of a causal model. I wouldn't say even the most mechanistic models are entirely mechanistic. But you build up the demand from the bottom up, looking at end uses with behavioral assumptions and technological assumptions, and often use some optimization to see, well, this is how we think the households will change their demands, their end uses, if we change the technologies, the regulations, the pricings, things like that. So the advantages of this approach, and I'll give an example, well, David has an example, but I'll give a couple more, is that it's mechanistic. You have a detailed causal understanding of the causes of demand and the causes of changes that will occur. Disadvantages is we have some lack of end-use data. The household motivations are not completely clear. I remember when I first started doing these mechanistic models, I did it just for theoretical fun. So this was Lund 1995. I've been seeing some contingent valuation studies, which is still another approach to doing this work that Michael Hanneman had done, a very famous economist. He had some contingent valuation studies of the economic value of water supply reliability, and the results were just made no sense. They gave you really no insight into what was going on. Gosh, we ought to be able to do better than this. Something it gives us a better sense. So started making these mechanistic study models where I could have different water supply reliability profiles, and then I have behavioral assumptions of if households are trying to minimize their costs, including both the technological, the financial costs and the hassle costs of implementing these things. I could then compare different probability distributions of water supply reliability and estimate the economic value of that reliability, compare it with the costs of getting that reliability. So when I first did it, I thought, well, this is kind of fun theory, but I don't really believe that households are cost minimizers. And then David came along and applied this thing to Jordan, and it kind of fit. You know, what came out of Monte Carlo modeling actually fit empirical data. I thought, well, maybe there's some hope for this. And since that time, we've probably had 5 or 10 different locations between David's group and my group that have compared actual metered use with the Monte Carlo results that we get from the probability distributions. They fit sort of like David's. Plot that he got earlier. But these models are never completely mechanistic. We always are relying on empirical understandings of behavior and hassle costs and shower lengths and things like that. So we're always having to pull these things together. We're never going to escape the empiricism, but I guess really what I'm saying here is the mechanistic models, their advantage is that they demand that the empirical data be more localized at the end-use level, which is something, fortunately, that the smarter meters are now being able to give us a lot more insights onto. And then we aggregate that up into more of a causal framework so we can get a better sense of what should be pushing the demands around. And there's some really nice work that David and Adele have been doing and Albach has been doing in recent years, and perhaps others. So here's some papers. Now, I'm hopefully been part of these as well. So let me just touch on a couple of these studies. The first was really more like the simulation vein of what David presented to look at energy emissions. So we're going to look at energy and greenhouse gas emissions that come from residential water end uses, look at spatial variability and heterogeneity, how they affect water energy use, and look at how rate structures affect these. So basically what we have is water-related energy model and a water and use model that lives on top of. We have all these different end-use estimates that come out of these surveys by Aquacraft, as well as household characteristic surveys or the demography of the place. Climate data sometimes feeds in and affects some of the end uses, outdoor use in particular. We have the residential energy uses, some of the water heater characteristics data. And then we have greenhouse gas emissions for different energy mixes that supply the energy use that supplies the hot water. And then we have some rate structure effects that change how water and energy are used. And basically the end use model adds up all the individual end uses. So you can think of it a little differently than our traditional way of looking at water economics is to have one demand curve for all household water use. But really the services that are being provided by household water use are different. Each of these is a very different service that happens to involve water and technology and time and things like that. So what we're trying to do with the mechanistic analysis is really having smaller economic models of the component end uses, and then we sum those up to the household. And we look at the utility rate structure effects on the individual uses and sum that up. So in each end-use model, we have rates. So the total shower use is going to be total use is divided by the showers times the shower length times the shower frequency times the number of residents. Each of which, so the red ones that have red boxes are affected by household characteristics. So we have probability distributions of each of those household characteristics. We have different user behaviors, which are all probabilistic. It would be interesting to see for an individual, what's the probability distribution of one individual's shower length. And I know different members of my family have different distributions with different means, some of which are offset by quite a bit. You could do a similar thing with outdoor, where they have household characteristics, user behaviors, and then we have external conditions, which might affect, say prices, which might also affect some of the user behaviors. So you can compare, this is for the city of Davis, California, you can compare the real data for the showers and meters versus the model results, and looks pretty good to me. We mostly use some of the East Bay mud. This is the city of Oakland and its neighboring area. For much of this modeling, where we have more detailed work on end uses, particularly on the hot water side, so we have some hot water numbers. Again, we have these different household characteristics, user behaviors, and external conditions. External conditions in this case would be, for the hot water, would be the temperature of the inlet, and the temperature, inlet water, incoming water, and the temperature of the area. East Bay mud is an interesting district. It has a coastal area, which is cooler, and an inlet area, which is much warmer. So you might see some effects there on hot water. And then we check all these modeling results out. I think Alvar is just incredibly good with graphics. So here's all the energy use for water-related energy use. It's basically the water heater, as people know. And the total energy, total water use, some of which goes through the water heater. And so you can see which of the water uses have energy components and which ones don't, and how big they are for this service area. I think it's East Bay mud. So 80% of the total water-related energy is water heater. 2% of the per capita greenhouse gases come out of the water, the energy used for heating the water. And the energy and water costs for drinking water are about the same, and for the faucets, water costs a little bit higher than the energy use. For a bath, the energy cost is higher than the water cost. And for showers, water cost is just a little more. Alvar looked at this for lots of different cities, so you can decompose the use both for the energy and the water, and take it all apart nicely. Something that you have a hard time doing with empirical models. And you can see some interesting differences between Southern California and Northern California. You can look at household energy and water costs per capita per city. They're sort of washed out, but again, Monte Carlo analysis is wonderful because you can sort of make your own data. Once you have that nice end-use data and the population data, you're using that Monte Carlo approach to sort of interpolate and meld those two distributions, the things you know, to get a lot more finer results. And David did a really nice job of showing that off. And so here's some sort of Rosenberg-esque plots showing the same things where, okay, so this is the top 25% of water energy use. Same lessons that David had. Go after the big guys. Then you can see some potential for joint management between water and energy. So similar things. So efficient water heater gives you greenhouse gas reductions, some small total cost reductions, quite a bit of energy cost reduction, no water cost reduction. Change the water temperature, these things. Change the irrigation efficiency in your outdoor water use. Saves you some in total costs, saves you lots in total water use, but doesn't do anything on the energy side or the greenhouse gas side for this system. If it was in Southern California, you would reduce some of the energy cost and emissions for the utilities, but not for the household. Not directly for the household. So again, you can get some really nice policy implications from the mechanistic modeling that we couldn't get out of the empirical modeling. Another approach to this, another variant of this problem is, okay, so now we've done some sort of simulation-based or fast modeling, Monte Carlo modeling of simulated service areas for demand. Now let's look in a little bit more of a normative way. We want to have a look at the least cost mix of water conservation activities for California households, including energy costs as well as water supply costs. So we're looking at the mix of activities that the household might do. And we might be doing this out into the future, exploring at different rate structures, looking at different probability distributions of water availability in terms of drought frequency and things like that. We might be looking at changes in future climate where the ambient temperatures are different and the like. How is that going to affect things? And we might be interested in sort of going back to sort of the classical economics and using, with this kind of a model, if I vary the price structure, I can now back calculate from the model results what are the price elasticities of demand, both on the energy price and the water price, and then the cross elasticities of energy and water use. So this is also all the fun you can have with the model. And so another different way of presenting some of what David had, to sort of look at the complementarity of water, hot water heating with both energy use and water use. So in these optimization models, as Dave was saying, we're going to be looking at long-term retrofits and short-term behavioral changes. So we will look at sort of conservation that responds directly to a drought episode and permanent conservation that helps with the drought but also helps in the long term. Or from a utilities perspective, reduces your revenues in the long term but also takes pressure off of you during a drought. And so this modeling approach gives you a way of looking at the different rate structures in that kind of setting and the financial sufficiency that you might have. The costs that you include, I think, in the household model would be the annualized cost of the retrofits and the financial cost of the household of doing these activities, and then the hassle costs of the behavior changes. And quite often when we do this model, we get into questions of, okay, what percentage of the households do their own plumbing? And what's the hassle cost to them of doing their own plumbing? And for the households that call someone in to do plumbing, what's the financial cost of having the plumber come in, plus the hassle cost of them finding a plumber? Well, if it's a household that has recently been working with plumbers, they know who to call. But if it's if you're new to the area and you haven't called a plumber before, well, that's a new cost to you. So lots of interesting things you have to sort of intuit through. So some data there that sort of make up a little bit. We have guesstimated. And then we have the effectiveness of all the water conservation activities in terms of water use, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions. And so embedded in all of those assumptions is how much are you shifting water use, that's probability distributions of water use, and the different parameters in the model. So I had to put some equations up here since a lot of you all are engineers. And so up here we have the cost of implementing the different energy and water conservation activities, the different probabilities of water and energy availability events, and then what they do to the cost of water and energy use. And there's some other things here. And then we have all the same kind of list that David had for constraints. Conservation of mass, limits on how much of each activity you can do, how some of the actions interact. You can't have price affect demand very much unless you have a meter. So for unmetered systems, you have to have a permanent action that goes in to facilitate a temporary action. And the results that come out tell you all kinds of interesting things. So we can look at the adoption rate in our Monte Carlo sample of different activities in different cities. And for this result, we had a lot of real water conservation coming out of the smarter irrigation forms. But you see it vary quite a lot city to city. And the difference between that and toilet retrofits. And then we can do a similar thing for energy-related energy savings that are consequent from this. So when we retrofit the showers, we get more energy savings and higher adoption of that. So when we include the energy costs and consequences, we tend to increase water conservation, particularly from shower retrofits, closed water retrofits, reduced shower length, things like that. And we get quite a bit increase in greenhouse gas savings, energy savings, and savings.
Sorry, could I have a question? So are you saying that when you notify people that there's an energy savings component of a water measure, that the adoption rate is higher?
In modeling land.
Okay.
Remember, these aren't real people. These are synthetic people that come out of a Monte Carlo generator that are optimizing for these hassle costs and economic costs. So it says that, yeah, if you believe people behave this way, and there's some remote indication that they kind of behave this way, then yeah, they ought to be, you should see some additional benefits. Now, I don't know that I would believe it to be 24%, but it seems like it probably is more than 2%, probably less than 50%. And this is an attempt to sort of go in and because we can go in and change the rate structure, we can change the prices, and then back out from the model results of all these virtual people, virtual households, and estimate the price elasticity of demand and things like that. So I'm a little bit worried about this model after yesterday's talks, because yesterday's talks, everybody seemed to agree that the price elasticity of water demand ought to be 0.3, negative 0.3. Well, this has got something less elastic than that. So maybe there's more human flexibility than we're shown in the model. But we can also estimate the energy elasticity of the water demand and all the cross and some of the cross elasticities. So from this, we get some interesting policy implications that come out of the mechanistic model that we couldn't get out of empirical models, including how much water-related energy should increase water conservation and energy and greenhouse gas savings. And you still have to do root one behavioral actions. And then we can take this, I'll take this real quick, to take these household models and then build them into utility scale models. Again, something that Dave's done a lot of work on. To look at how do the households get along with the utility folks. And so you have the customer model, utility models, energy and water utilities, and the costs and sources and constraints on the energy supplies, energy and water supplies. And so for East Bay Mine, you'll have these different sub-areas that have different elevations and different energy requirements within the utility costs, within the utility populations, all those things. Probably different demographic characteristics, and household characteristics, and household distributions and life, but you have different sources. Again, in modeling land, you can do all these really cool things. And so really using the model, one of the things I really like about modeling is that it forces you to integrate all the pieces together, and you can see how they all fit together. It's a lot of work, but it's kind of interesting. Good way to learn about a system. And again, much like what David was suggesting, very little of the house of the water energy related to water use is from pumping and treatment. Most of it is for water heating in different settings. Again, in these models, we can also specify the end uses in terms of time of day as well. So you can disaggregate the end use component models to time of day, and then you can look at, can I shift end uses from one time to another in order to reduce peak costs. Shifting peaks. And when you look at the output conservation, you'll see you get some reductions in all these bad things. But you can also create some financial problems with the utility. Some of the constraints we can add in to the model, however, are financial, where we say, well, I have to be able to make at least this much money off of the household to cover the overall fixed cost of the utility. How can I best do that? So again, looking at the households and the utilities together, we can learn some things out of these models that we would have a clear grasp on otherwise. So some of the hard parts I think that are left to do. To me, one of the harder and more important areas, certainly in California, is outdoor water use. In California, basically half of urban water use is outdoor use. And everybody's different. You walk down the street, everybody's got a different yard. Everybody's got a different willingness to pay for that yard, for water flow, willingness to conserve during drought. And it's half the water use. So indoor stuff is pretty easy. You know, if I flush a toilet here or in Cincinnati or Monteverde, I'm still flushing a toilet. I still get that same service. It's a lot easier to learn from elsewhere, but California's climate, different people, I think it's a little bit harder outdoors. Monte Carlo distribution would be a little more interesting. So I'd like to see more studies just on the outdoor use and sociology and economics of that. On the energy, it's all the hot water here. I think David and others have shown a lot of details of that. In the showers and is the biggest hot water user, certainly the least standardized. Your dishwasher, clothes washer, they're programmed to a certain pattern. So we can get those pretty well. Getting data organized. So we're starting to get a lot of data. We're going to get a lot more data. The hardest part is not going to be getting data. It's going to be keeping it organized, getting it organized, keeping it organized, trying to figure out what to do with it. That's a great problem to have. We worked hard to have it. A lot of people worked hard to give us this problem. And the last thing I think we really, it's going to be a hard thing that's left science always has theory and empirical going together, stepping on top of each other as they climb awkwardly forward. I don't want to suggest having empirical models, having mechanistic models and ignore all the empirical stuff. You can't make progress that way. You've got to build together. But it's more than just data collection. The mechanistic models, the best thing about them to me is it gives you a framework for making sense of data and learning from the combined. Another aspect, coming back to the outdoor use, landscape use. This is comparing annual water use in different parts of California based on sort of the water needs, compared with the water needs that you would have for that same area, coastal area, versus the different effect of land use. So if you're in coastal parts of California, if you're in San Francisco, how expensive is a house in San Francisco? It might be a little bit cheaper than it is here, which is to say, ginormous. Or the new word, huge, right? If you go inland, how much does it cost to buy land there? It's cheaper, so people tend to have larger lots. So you've got two effects on outdoor water use in California. One is the land use effect, the climate effect. So if I'm in the desert, in a warmer, drier climate, even if I had the same land use as I did in the coastal area, I would have more water use. But I have even more water use in the desert because I'm out in the desert. I got no neighbors. I got a big yard, a bigger yard than I would have had. So it's sort of a land use and climate effect, and probably quite a bit of sociology going on there as well. What do people like? And we've got some great opportunities in this. The smart meter data is going to drown us. We have to figure out how to swim to the top, see our way above it. I think there's lots of good opportunities to commercialize some of the mechanistic modeling to give a lot of insights into real-time operations as well as climate and policy studies. And then the integration of this household analysis with these other purposes, the social utility, global scales, where we also have problems and perspectives. And then to go back to what Greg was saying yesterday, include a little bit more financial and risk analysis, because financial analysis is ultimately an existential priority for the utilities. So conclusions, nexus modeling is harder, but more interesting and useful than just yakking about XYZ nexus. It gives us a way of organizing the problem, and give us some flexibility and insights that empirical modeling alone doesn't give us, but we need to have them both together to make sure that things are really working right. Be a little skeptical about some of this stuff. But overall, I think the future looks great, both for research and applications. I'll stop there.
How much do you think people are aware of the share of the water-related energy cost in the total water energy bill? Probably not much, no?
Well, in California, the biggest problem is, in 2005, the Energy Commission published a report saying 19% of electricity use was water-related, and 22%, 23% of natural gas use was water-related. And everybody thought, oh, it's the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. Those projects are causing all of this cost. And in the report, if you read more deeply than that, like to the next page, it says, no, 75% of all of that water-related energy use is at the household level. So probably my biggest job in this field in California is dispelling that myth. You know, if you want to look at energy related to water use, it's you in your hot shower today. You know.
And the continuation of my question is, I think there is a reflection that there is we need a huge effort in pedagogy, in explaining this, explaining water conservation action to people, no? And I think water and advanced resource are clearly showing that water and energy utilities can work together in implementing conservation strategies because
Right.
there is this nexus. But the problem is that in order to promote these conservation strategies, this has to be done mainly by them, by the utilities.
Yeah.
So, but they don't have the right incentive. So for me, the big challenge, challenge ahead is how to design the right incentive for water and energy utilities to promote conservation. And this is quite connected also to user charges. So how to design the right pricing policies that we have the right incentive for utilities to promote conservation. Because if not, we can do many interesting analysis and modeling and games, but there is something missing. That is the implementation phase. No? So I mean, I think there is a challenge on designing incentive for utilities in order to promote.
I remember when I was a graduate student back when the earth was colder. And looking at urban water conservation, and the urban water suppliers said, well, there's this thing with energy, and we're trying to get the Seattle energy utility to pay us to get people to conserve hot water showers. And the electric utility would say, yeah, there's this thing, a lot of our water energy use is related to water use, and we're trying to get the water department to pay for conservation, right? So because the interests are divided, water utility, the energy utility, the wastewater utility, stormwater utility, the governor's office on greenhouse gases, and they all want somebody else to pay for it. And so we end up in this really odd game theory of that. There's not much I can do about that, but all I can do is say, well, we have this kind of analysis methods where we can explore the effects of different kinds of prices, the effects of different kinds of regulation on how that might actually play out on the ground, and which segments of the society are likely to be more impacted or less impacted by different measures. So, you know, figuring out the game theory of how you get these different regulatory agencies and utilities to cooperate, that's really a challenge. The modeling can sometimes give you some insights for that, of what looks promising, but the hard part is the sociology of the institutions. No question?
So, either you or David might know this. So, I never quite knew that the hot water use is such a big cost from a household perspective. When you look at it overall, I don't know much about these tankless water heaters, but are they significantly, more? I know they're more efficient. They don't have storage, but are they that more beneficial? Is there any thought about these things being part of just building codes in the future instead of hot water tanks?
I don't know about the code, but when I showed the cumulative distribution of heater efficiencies, they're way up on the right.
Okay.
And you can think of it as like a reservoir storage capacity problem, right? Our hot water heater tanks in the US are just oversized. If they're designed for that one case where 7 kids are gonna shower all on the road and you want hot water for the 7 kids. Or 7
They're
persons.
designed for Christmas holidays when all of your relatives come
Most
stay
of
with
the
you.
time you're just heating all that water and keeping it hot, and it doesn't stay there. Maybe even looking at the residence time, the water in the heater, that would be a more compelling way to communicate that we don't need all that capacity.
There are other issues here with hot water.
But I think it's definitely a potential.
Aren't Eastern Canada's water heaters based on gas? I mean, we need.
Well, it also depends on the source too. That's
Because I don't know if there are Eastern Canada's water heaters based on electricity, and given that there will be a diffusion of PV panels that will use to heat water by generating electricity, to have a storage of water and to manage it in a more efficient way would also be a solution. If we have access to gas and if it
optimization on end uses,
Yeah,
not just on the household. This is a really good example.
yeah.
Because in some parts of the country, depending upon whether you have gas or electricity, depending upon whether the technology is centralized within a household, so you have one centralized heater, flash heater, and then you still have the travel lengths that you have to worry about. Or are you going to try the technology where every shower has its own flash heater, so you have different capital costs, and so, to me, it will probably vary which is optimal depending upon the usage characteristics. So if you had a dormitory, maybe one is going to work, whereas if you just have a regular household, you might want to have it more centralized.
That would be interesting to look at how we ended up in the US with tanks like that to begin with. Because I mean, like in Jordan, people who can afford them have flash. No one has tanks. No one has. It's all.
Yeah, those hot water heaters up on the roof.
That's the cold water storage.
That's the
And
cold
it
water
turns hot when it just sits in the sun. It's actually solar. And I'm saying that out of personal experience. Like there were hours of the day where you couldn't even take a shower. It was so hot. The cold water that's it's too hot to take a shower. Or at least for me.
Yeah.
I think of cold showers, but you have to wait till later in the evening to. But the hot water or the solar heating too, I think that's another one. We haven't looked at that at all. There's a lot more that can be done there.
Okay, any other questions?
Oh, there's another interesting aspect, I think, on energy peaks. Because moving the energy peak is worth a lot more economically than moving the water peak. So, in terms of storing hot water, maybe it's worthwhile to have big tanks. If you're going to shift, if you could use your solar panels during the off-peak time to heat up the water that you use on the peak time.
This is what we do actually. We're running a project in which we are doing just that because we want to shift the energy peak, and therefore we use the power produced by the PV panels to heat the water during the day, and then it will be used later on.
It's like a battery. You turn your hot water tank into a battery.
Essentially is exactly like a
In
battery.
Spain, there is the plumbing code enforced that the new building since 2011, a specific percentage of the hot water production is produced by the solar panels on the roofs of the plants since 2011, and it depends on the climatic zone that you are in the country. So it's around 70–60% of the energy, and I mean this is the plumbing code exactly. But when you look at the design restrictions and you see that there is a lot of gaps, because most of the restrictions that they tell you, okay, for example, that the accumulation volume should be between 50 and 180 times the surface of the solar panels that you have. It's something, who designed this rule? I mean, why did they put that rule in the standard? So there's still many gaps in the standard. But if you want to know a little bit, I have the problem is in Spanish, but maybe I could translate those slides, because that's the slides that I used to teach this course in the agriculture school in Valencia. Maybe so you have an idea about the design and the sizing of also the accumulation and the different configurations, because there is, of course, you have the accumulator, you can have it at home, which, I mean, we are thinking about block of apartments, so maybe the accumulation can be at each apartment, or maybe you have a single accumulator for the whole building, and there's a set of configurations that, I mean, maybe you are interested in that.
Another thing too, and this only came up because I was talking with my brother about this, he was trying to figure this out, was you have roof space for solar panels, but you go photovoltaic, or you go hot water heat.
That's right.
And I mean, the roof space is limited, it's a scarce resource. And
That's your binding constraint.
and which they both have energy implications, but which way do you go?
Because if you go electricity, you have some flexibility in the use of that solar.
Yeah, the battery, but if you're using your hot water heater as storage, I mean, it's
But I could use the electricity from the solar panel to heat the water.
Yeah, but there's also no
With some
beneficial-
efficiency loss.
But yeah, but it's not so efficient.
You know, it's not so efficient, but
In Spain, there is no such a problem because by law, that you are enforced to use it for heating the water, and also if you use solar panels, photovoltaic solar panels, then you have to pay an extra money to the electricity company. And this is stupid law that they made. So to prevent people to install those solar panels to produce electricity at home.
Because they want.
So they don't, in fact, they don't want you to do that.
They don't want to prevent people to
Well, because most politicians go to the board of directors of the electric companies and go, that's
They have the
the,
same problem here.
that's the simple explanation.
Yes,
That's the quick explanation.
Any other questions, or maybe we should have David do his exercise?
Yes, I think that